promise me you will wait for me, that you will be here when I am out, that you will make up for every single year I spend in there.
Saifo's eyes went soft, that particular softness she had spent 2 years collecting like it was currency, and he reached across the corridor bench and took both her shaking hands in his warm, steady ones. Naledi, he said it slowly, the way you say something you mean. I will be at those gates the day you walk out. You will not even finish counting. She exhaled. Behind them a court official called a case number, and somewhere down the corridor a woman was crying loudly, and a child was asking why and nobody was answering the child. You swear, Naledi said. On my mother. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face the way you search a contract for the clause that will ruin you, and she found nothing, no flinch, no flicker, just those calm brown eyes and that half-smile that had dismantled her completely at a neighbor's funeral 2 years ago when he handed her a cold drink she had not asked for and said, "You look like someone who has been standing too long." She had laughed. She was not laughing now. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said, and squeezed her hands and smiled, and she felt her chest do that collapsing thing it always did around him. The court official called her name. Inside courtroom, for the air smelled of old paper and anxiety and someone's lunch, and Naledi stood at the front with her back straight, because her mother had raised her to stand up straight in rooms that were trying to make you small. The judge was a woman, which Naledi had hoped would mean something, and quickly understood would not. Advocate Patel, the lawyer Saifo had eventually sent, not immediately and not urgently, stood beside her smelling of cigarettes and communicating through sighs, and when the prosecutor finished reading the charges, for stolen vehicles registered in Naledi Dlamini's name, Patel leaned toward her and murmured, "The documentation is very thorough," which was his way of saying they were finished. "What about Saifo?" Naledi whispered. Patel looked at his papers. "What about Saifo, advocate?" "My instruction is to represent you," he said, "not other parties." She turned and looked at Saifo in the third row, and he held her gaze steadily, calmly, the way a man looks at a situation he has already resolved in his mind, and something cold moved through her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The judge cleared her throat. "Naledi Dlamini, this court finds you guilty on 4 counts of possession of stolen property with intent to profit, and sentences you to 5 years imprisonment." The gallery murmured. Naledi did not cry. She kept her eyes on Saifo, and she did not cry, because he was watching for it. She could feel him watching for it. And she decided in that exact moment that the last thing he would ever see on her face for free was her breaking. He would have to earn that, and she was going to make certain he never could. 2 days before this, her shop. "Thandi, I need you to listen to me carefully." Naledi was standing behind the counter of Naledi's Touch, still in her work apron, her hands smelling of relaxer cream, and Thandi was sitting in client chair number 2 eating chips from a packet and scrolling her phone with the other hand and doing neither thing fully. "I am listening," Thandi said without looking up. "Thandi." She looked up. Naledi put both hands flat on the counter. "I need you to run the shop while I am away." Thandi put the chips down. "You are not going anywhere." "They have the documents, Thandi, for cars in my name. I tried to explain. Patel says the case is." She stopped, breathed, continued. "I need someone I trust here. Bull will handle the clients. She knows everything, but I need you to handle the money, the supplier orders, the rent, all of it." Thandi was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Why do you not just tell them it was Saifo?" "Because I cannot prove it." "You could try." "I signed the papers, Thandi. My signature is on every single document. It does not matter what I say without evidence. All that happens if I try is I make it worse, and he walks away clean, and I still go to prison, except now I go angry and stupid and with no plan." Thandi looked at her for a long time with those large soft eyes that had been getting Thandi out of trouble since she was 7. "So you are just going to take it?" "I am going to survive it," Naledi said firmly, "which is different. Now are you going to help me or not?" Thandi got up from the chair, walked around the counter, and hugged her sister so tightly that Naledi felt something behind her eyes begin to burn, and she pressed it back down because she had decided she would do her crying at home, in private, not in the shop, not anywhere someone could see it and report back. "I will protect this place," Thandi said into her shoulder. "I promise you. Everything will be exactly how you left it." Naledi pulled back and held her sister's face in both hands, this beautiful, difficult, beloved little face, and said, "I know." She believed her. God help her, she believed both of them. Prison came at her fast. Processing was loud and fluorescent and smelled of disinfectant and fear and something underneath, both that she could not name. and the woman doing her intake had the face of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago, and she asked questions in a flat, quick voice and wrote down answers without looking up, and at one point Naledi said, "I have a business, I have staff depending on me." And the woman said, "Next of kin," and Naledi understood that her life as she knew it had just become a file number. Her cellmate was a woman named Zadwa, 40-something, broad-shouldered, with a scar through her left eyebrow and the kind of stillness that either meant she was at peace or was dangerous, and it turned out to be both. Zadwa looked her up and down the first night and said, "First time." It was not a question. "Yes," Naledi said. "You will cry tonight, that is fine, everyone does, but do it quietly because I sleep light, and in the morning you wake up and you decide who you are going to be in here, because who you are outside does not work the same way in here, you understand." Naledi sat on the edge of her bunk and looked at this woman she had known for 4 minutes. "What if I want to be the same person I was outside?" Zadwa almost smiled. "Then you are going to have a very hard 5 years. Naledi pulled her thin blanket around her shoulders, and outside the cell block someone was shouting, and someone else was laughing at the shouting, and somewhere further away music was playing from a phone that was not supposed to be there. She did not cry. She stared at the ceiling and thought about Saifo's face in that courtroom, that calm checkbox expression, and she turned it over and over in her mind like a stone she was learning the weight of, because one day she was going to need to know exactly how heavy it was. Month 1, a letter arrived from Saifo. She read it 3 times standing at the small window of her cell with her back to Zadwa, and it said all the right things, that he missed her, that he was working on the appeal, that he was keeping an eye on the shop, that she should be strong, that he loved her, and she pressed it against her chest and allowed herself, just briefly 5 seconds, to feel relief. Month 4, the letters were shorter. Month 6, they arrived without a specific day, just a month written at the top, as if even the date had become too much of a commitment. Month 8, nothing. She wrote to him anyway. She described her days in careful detail, not because they were interesting, but because writing made her feel like she still existed in the world outside, like she was still a person with a life that would resume, and she wrote about the prison garden she had started working in, and the paralegal course she had found through the education program, and a funny thing Zadwa had said that week, and she sealed each letter with the careful precision of someone who still believed they would be read. Month 10, Zadwa's cousin from Orlando East came for a visit. She sat across from Zadwa in the visiting room, a large woman with Zadwa's same direct eyes, and they talked for a while about family things, and then the cousin mentioned, not unkindly, just as news, the way people in townships share news, that there had been a big wedding in Meadowlands last month. "Who got married?" Zadwa asked. "That's Saifo Kumalo, you know, the one with the car business. He married that young Dlamini girl, the pretty one, Thandi something, big white tent, DJ, the whole thing." The visiting room kept going around Naledi, people talking, a child knocking over a cup, a guard walking slowly along the wall, all of it continuing completely normally, as if the floor had not just opened up beneath her chair. Zadwa turned and looked at her. Naledi's face had gone very still. "Naledi," Zadwa said quietly. "I am fine," Naledi said. Her voice did not shake, which was the strange part. Her voice was completely steady, but her hand, resting on the table, had curled slowly into a fist so tight that her knuckles had gone pale, and she sat like that for the rest of the visit, still and quiet, and somewhere very far away. And when they walked back to the cell block, Zadwa said nothing, because there are things that words cannot reach, and Zadwa was old enough to know the difference. That night Naledi lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling and did not cry. She thought about Thandi's face in the shop, holding her, promising her, "I will protect this place, I promise you. Everything will be exactly how you left it." And she thought about Saifo's hands steady over hers in the courthouse corridor. "On my mother, I will be at those gates." And she turned both things over in her mind slowly and carefully, the way you turn over stones to see what is underneath. Then she got up, found her notebook, and began writing a very different kind of letter. Not to Saifo, not to Thandi, to herself. A list. Everything she was going to need to know when she got out. The cousin's name was Precious, and she had no idea she was detonating a bomb. She was just talking, the way people talk when they have news and a captive audience, leaning across the visiting room table with the comfortable energy of someone delivering entertainment, and Zadwa was nodding along, and Naledi was sitting 2 feet away pretending to read a letter she had already memorized. And then Precious said it. "That Saifo Kumalo finally got married. You know, the one with the car business in Meadowlands, big wedding, white tent DJ, the whole thing. People are still talking about the food. Zadwa made an interested noise. Who did he marry? Zadwa asked. That young Dlamini girl, Thandi, the pretty one with the long hair. You know, her mother sells Fetcook near the Maponya Mall. Sweet family, actually. Though I heard the older sister is in some kind of trouble, jail or something. Anyway, the wedding was beautiful. I saw the pictures on Facebook. Her dress was. Naledi stood up. Not dramatically, not loudly. She just stood up the way your body stands up when it has received information that the sitting position cannot contain, and she walked to the window at the far end of the visiting room and put one hand flat against the wall and looked out at the courtyard where two pigeons were fighting over something too small to identify. Zadwa appeared beside her 30 seconds later. Naledi. Do not, Naledi said. Zadwa was quiet. The two pigeons resolved their dispute and flew away in opposite directions, and Naledi watched them go, and the room behind her continued its noise, children, laughter, a guard's radio, a woman crying softly near the door, all of it carrying on at full volume, as if the world had not just folded in half. Thandi, Naledi said, to nobody, to the window, to the pigeons that were already gone. Her voice was completely flat. That night she lay on her bunk and did not sleep, and did not cry, and did not speak, and Zadwa, who understood the architecture of certain kinds of pain, left her entirely alone, which was the most generous thing anyone had done for her in months. She stared at the ceiling, and she went back. 7 months ago, Saifo's third visit. He had arrived late, which was not unusual, and he was wearing a new jacket, which was also not unusual, but there was something else, something she had noticed and filed away without examining. A scent that was not his cologne, and was not the visiting room's permanent smell of industrial cleaner and other people's desperation. Something lighter, floral, familiar in a way she could not immediately place. And she had almost asked about it, and then he had smiled at her and taken her hands and said, "You look tired, are they feeding you properly?" And the question had dissolved in the warmth of him paying attention. She placed the perfume now, lying on her bunk at 2 in the morning with the clarity that only comes when every comfortable explanation has been removed. It was Thandi's perfume, the one Naledi had bought her for her birthday. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed through her nose, slowly, once, twice, 3 times. 8 months ago, a phone call. Mama Dlamini's voice on the prison phone, careful in a way that her mother's voice was never careful. Her mother was a woman who said everything she thought at the volume she thought it. Careful was not in her vocabulary. And yet there it was, this strange new carefulness, like someone walking across a floor they were not sure would hold them. "How are you, my child?" "I am fine, Mama. How is the shop? Has Thandi been going in regularly?" A pause. "Thandi is very busy these days." "Busy how?" "You know how young people are, running around. She came on Sunday for lunch, though." "Did Saifo come with her?" Another pause, shorter but denser, the kind of pause that contains a whole conversation someone has decided not to have. "He was not here when I was here," her mother said, which was not an answer to the question she had asked. And Naledi had noticed it and told herself she was being paranoid, that prison did things to your mind, made you suspicious of silences that were just silences. She was not being paranoid. The silences were not just silences. 10 months ago, a visit from Thandi. She had arrived wearing a new dress, which was not unusual because Thandi arrived everywhere wearing something new, but she had also arrived 20 minutes late, slightly out of breath, and when Naledi asked where she had parked she said, "Just down the road," and changed the subject so smoothly that Naledi had admired it at the time without understanding what she was admiring. They had talked about the shop, about Mama, about a cousin's new baby, and at one point Thandi had reached across and fixed the collar of Naledi's prison shirt with a tenderness so genuine that Naledi had felt tears push up behind her eyes and had blinked them back, and Thandi had said, "I miss you so much, it is not the same without you." And she had meant it. Naledi was certain she had meant it, which was perhaps the most confusing part of all of this. You could miss someone and betray them at the same time. Apparently. Back in the present, 3 in the morning. Naledi got up, went to the small metal sink, ran cold water over her wrists, and looked at herself in the scratched metal square that served as a mirror, her own face looking back at her, distorted slightly by the cheap metal, which felt appropriate. "Okay," she said to herself, quietly so Zadwa could sleep. She went back to bed. She did not sleep. She stopped eating on the 3rd day, not as a decision exactly, more as a fact that her body arrived at without consulting her, the food arriving on the tray and sitting there, and her looking at it with the complete indifference you feel toward things that belong to a different life. Zadwa watched this for 2 days without comment, because Zadwa understood that some grief needed room to move around in. But on the third evening she sat on the edge of Naledi's bunk uninvited, which she had never done before, and placed a bread roll and a cup of tea on the blanket between them. "Eat." "I am not hungry." "I did not ask if you were hungry, I said eat." Naledi looked at the bread roll, then at Zadwa, then back at the bread roll. "He was not worth going to prison for," Naledi said. "No. She was my sister." "I know. I bought her that perfume, Zadwa. I saved up and bought it for her birthday, and she wore it to visit him while I was sitting in here because of him." Zadwa said nothing. "What kind of person does that?" Naledi said, and her voice finally cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough, like a wall that is held for a long time and lets one small piece go. "The kind that is weak and selfish and afraid and in love with the wrong person," Zadwa said, with no particular emotion, just the flatness of someone stating geography. "The same kind that exists in every family, in every neighborhood, in every country on this earth, the same kind you are not going to let destroy you, because you are not that kind." Naledi picked up the bread roll. She took a small bite and chewed it slowly, and it tasted like nothing, but she chewed it anyway. And Zadwa picked up her tea and went back to her own bunk, and they sat in silence in the dark, and somewhere down the corridor someone was playing gospel music very softly, and it floated through the wall like it was looking for somewhere to land. The paralegal course had been running for 3 months before Naledi properly paid attention to it. She had signed up in month 2 because it gave her something to do on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons that was not sitting in the cell thinking about Saifo's face. And she had attended in the same passive way you attend things when you are present in body but nowhere in spirit, doing the minimum, passing the assessments, filing the certificates. But now she sat in the Tuesday class with a different quality of attention. The facilitator, a small energetic woman named Advocate Hlanganani, who wore enormous glasses and had the passionate delivery of someone who genuinely believed that information was a weapon, was explaining how documentation worked in criminal cases, how ownership was established, how liability was assigned, and how, in certain circumstances, a paper trail that looked definitive could be challenged if you knew where to look. Naledi leaned forward. "Can you repeat that last part?" she said. Advocate Hlanganani looked at her over the enormous glasses, clearly pleased to have a student awake at this level, and repeated it, and Naledi wrote it down word for word, pressing hard on the pen, and underlined it twice. She started writing letters again, but not to Saifo. The first one went to the Records Division of the Johannesburg Commercial Crimes Unit, requesting, politely and in the correct formal language she had learned in class, a copy of the original case file for her conviction under her case number. The second went to a legal aid organization in Braamfontein, whose details Advocate Hlanganani had shared with the class, asking about the process for challenging a conviction on the basis of new evidence. The third went to her mother. It was short. It said, "Mama, I know you know something you did not tell me, and I understand why you did not tell me, and I am not angry with you, but I need you to write down everything you remember, everything you saw, every time Saifo was somewhere he should not have been, every time something felt wrong. I need you to write it all down and send it to me, because I am coming home, and when I come home I am coming home with something, love Naledi." She sealed it, addressed it carefully, and handed it to the post collection without hesitation. Then she went back to her bunk, opened her notebook to a clean page, and at the top wrote 2 words. Everything. Everyone. And she began. The gate opened at 7:43 in the morning, and Naledi Dlamini walked out of it carrying a small bag, wearing the same borrowed dress she had worn into the courtroom 3 years ago, which fit her properly now because prison food had taken care of the 2 sizes. Nobody was waiting for her. She had not told anyone she was coming. She stood on the pavement outside the facility and breathed the outside air, which smelled of taxi exhaust and someone's fried egg and the particular Johannesburg morning smell that she had not realized she had missed until it hit her all at once. And she stood there for exactly 30 seconds, just breathing, just standing, just being outside. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the taxi rank. Zadwa had hugged her at 5 that morning in the cell, a brief hard hug, the kind that contains everything that does not need to be said, and then pulled back and held her by both shoulders and looked at her with those direct eyes. "You are ready," Zadwa said. "I have been ready for 2 years. I know, I was not asking, I was telling you." Zadwa released her shoulders and sat back on her bunk and picked up her book, because Zadwa expressed affection by immediately returning to normal, which Naledi had learned to understand and appreciate. Do not waste it. I will not. And eat something before you go to that lawyer. You cannot dismantle a man's life on an empty stomach. Naledi had laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that comes from your chest without permission. And Zadwa had not looked up from her book, but the corner of her mouth had moved slightly, which from Zadwa was practically a standing ovation. The lawyer's name was Advocate Sebalai, and Naledi had found her through the legal aid organization she had been writing to for 18 months. A woman in her 50s with short natural hair, reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and the organized desk of someone who had long ago decided that chaos was a luxury she could not afford. Naledi sat across from her and placed 3 things on the desk. A voice note, saved on a small digital recorder she had bought secondhand 6 months before her arrest, and kept in her bra the morning the police came to her shop because she had a habit, inherited from her father who had driven a taxi for 30 years, of keeping records of important conversations. A habit she had not even been conscious of until she was sitting in a prison cell, trying to remember what exactly Saifo had said to her the night she signed the documents. A letter from her mother, for pages, handwritten, detailing 7 separate occasions over 2 years where Saifo had visited the family home, or the shop, or various family events in the company of Thandi, with dates, times, and the names of people who had been present, and a folder of notes, compiled over 30 months in a prison cell, cross-referencing her own case documents with information from Advocate Hlanganani's paralegal course, identifying 4 specific points where the documentation against her contained inconsistencies that a competent advocate could pull apart in front of a judge. Advocate Sebalai picked up each item, examined it, set it down, and was quiet for a moment. "Where did you study?" she said. "Prison," Naledi said. Sebalai looked at her over the reading glasses, which she had put on to examine the folder, and something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "Play me the voice note." The recording was 40 seconds long. Saifo's voice, clear and calm, saying, "Naledi, just sign where I showed you. Everything is in your name for tax reasons. It is completely standard. I do this with all my business arrangements. Nobody is going to come looking. And if they do, you are just a name on a paper. They cannot prove anything beyond that, trust me." And then Naledi's voice, younger and happier and completely unsuspecting. "You are sure?" And Saifo, "I am sure. Now stop worrying and eat your food. The lamb here is excellent." The recording ended. The room was very quiet. "You carried this for 3 years, Sebalai said. "I did not know I had it for the first year," Naledi said. "I only found it when I was going through everything I owned before I went inside. It was still on the recorder in my bag. I almost deleted it. I thought it was nothing." "It is not nothing." "No," Naledi said. "It is not." Sebalai took off her reading glasses and let them hang on their chain and leaned back in her chair and looked at Naledi with the careful assessment of someone calculating odds. "This will not be fast," she said. "I have been patient for 3 years, advocate. I can manage a little longer. It will not be comfortable. They will investigate you again as part of the process. They will go through everything." "Let them," Naledi said. "I have nothing to hide. I never did." Sebalai nodded slowly, picked up her pen, and opened a fresh notepad. "Start from the beginning," she said, "and do not leave anything out." Naledi sat forward in her chair, folded her hands on the desk, and started from the beginning. 58 days later, on a Wednesday morning, 2 officers from the Commercial Crimes Unit knocked on the door of the house in Meadowlands that Saifo Kumalo had purchased 14 months ago and registered in his new wife's name, and asked him to accompany them to the station. Naledi was not there to see it. She was at her shop. She had reopened Naledi's touch 3 weeks after walking out, not because it was in good condition, because it was not. Thandi had run it with good intentions and poor attention, and the accounts were a disaster, and one of the chairs had a crack in the base that had been repaired badly with the wrong kind of glue. But because the shop was hers and standing in it, and running her hand along the counter, and smelling the familiar chemical warmth of the place, had done something to her chest that nothing else had managed in 3 years. She had hired Bull back immediately, because Bull was a professional and had been waiting, and she had hired a second stylist named Karabo, who was 23 and talented, and had the excellent quality of being completely unbothered by drama, which in Naledi's current life was worth more than any qualification. She was doing a client's braids when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Advocate Sebalai that said only, "Wednesday. Done." Naledi looked at it for a moment, then set the phone face down, picked up the next section of hair, and continued braiding. Karabo, who had been watching her from the next chair with the barely contained curiosity of someone who sensed they were in the presence of a significant moment, said, "Good news?" "Medium news," Naledi said, separating the section with a tail comb. "The good news comes later." The investigation moved the way Advocate Sebalai had warned her it would. Not fast, not clean, but thoroughly, and everything it touched it changed. The house went under investigation, which meant Thandi could not sell it and could not access the accounts attached to it, and the 3 cars registered in Saifo's name were seized, and 2 business associates whose names had appeared in the original case documents found themselves answering questions they had assumed were buried, and Saifo Kumalo, who had spent 3 years living in the comfortable certainty that everything was resolved, discovered very quickly that resolved and finished were not the same thing. Naledi heard most of this through Advocate Sebalai, and some of it through her mother, and a small amount of it through the Natural Information Network of a Soweto neighborhood, which operated with the speed and accuracy of a very well-staffed newsroom. She did not celebrate. She went to work, opened the shop, did her clients, locked up at 7, went home, ate, slept, and came back the next morning, and she did this every day with a steadiness that some people in the neighborhood mistook for coldness, and others recognized correctly as the behavior of a woman who had decided that the best revenge was an ordinary life, lived well, on her own terms. Thandi came on a Sunday. Naledi heard the knock and opened the door, and there was her sister, standing on the small concrete step in front of the house, 7 months pregnant, wearing a coat that could no longer button across the front, holding her own elbows with both arms in the way people hold themselves when they have run out of other things to hold on to. She looked terrible. Not ugly, because Thandi could not manage ugly, but hollowed out in a particular way, like a very beautiful thing that had been left out in whether it was not made for, and her eyes were swollen in the specific way that comes not from one cry, but from many cries accumulated over many days. And she looked at Naledi, and opened her mouth, and closed it and opened it again. "I know," she said, and her voice broke immediately on both words. "I know, and I am not going to ask you to forgive me. I am not going to stand here and make excuses. I know what I did. I know what we did, I know." Naledi looked at her. "He told me you had stopped loving him," Thandi said. "Before you even went inside, he said you had been pulling away for months. And I was so stupid, Naledi. I was so stupid, and I wanted to believe him because She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked at the ground. "Because I had loved him for longer than I told anyone. And that is not an excuse. I know it is not an excuse. I am just telling you the truth because you deserve the truth." The street behind Thandi was its usual Sunday self, a child on a bicycle, a dog investigating something near the gate next door, distant music from a house 3 doors down, the neighborhood carrying on completely indifferently. "He left," Thandi said, unnecessarily, because Naledi knew. 2 months ago, he said the investigation made things complicated, and he needed to stay with a friend, and then the friend's address turned out to be a woman in Pretoria, and I have not heard from him since except through his lawyer, who sent a letter about the house which I cannot read without crying, so I have not finished reading it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I have nowhere to go," she said very quietly. "Mama's place is too small and I cannot afford." She stopped again. "I am not asking because I deserve anything. I know I do not. I am asking because I am 7 months pregnant, and I am scared, and you are my sister, and I know I destroyed the right to say that, but I am saying it anyway, because I have nothing left that is more important than saying it." Naledi had known this moment was coming. She had thought about it in prison, imagined it in many versions, rehearsed the things she might say, the door closed firmly, the calm measured speech about consequences. The satisfaction she had assumed she would feel standing on the right side of this particular door, while Thandi stood on the wrong one. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt tired and sad, and something else underneath both of those things that was older than the betrayal and stronger than the anger. The specific feeling of looking at someone you have loved your whole life and finding that you still do, against all reasonable advice from your own brain. She looked at her sister for a long time. Thandi looked back, not pleading, not performing, just standing there in her unbuttoned coat with her swollen eyes and her borrowed humility waiting. Naledi stepped aside. Not warmly, not with a speech, not with a hug or a flood of forgiveness, just a step to the left and a hand on the door frame. A physical making of space, and Thandi walked past her into the house slowly, carefully, like someone who understood that they were being given something they had not earned and intended to be careful with it. Naledi closed the door, stood with her hand on it for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, because in this family, in this country, in this particular corner of the world, where people had been forgiving each other the unforgivable for generations out of sheer necessity, tea was where you started. It was not resolution. It was not forgetting. It was just the first small thing. The thing you did before the harder things. The thing that said we are still here. We are still speaking. We have not finished yet. Thandi appeared in the kitchen doorway, hesitant, one hand on the frame. "Can I sit?" she said. "You are pregnant," Naledi said, getting 2 cups from the shelf. "Not a guest, sit down." The corner of Thandi's mouth moved. Naledi's back was turned, so she did not see it. But she heard it. The small exhale that was almost a laugh. And she said nothing, and poured the water, and outside the Soweto Sunday continued at full volume. And inside this small kitchen 2 sisters sat down at a table that had held their families' meals and arguments and celebrations and silences for 20 years, and began slowly, without a map, the longest and most difficult journey either of them had ever attempted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the direction of it. And in this place, on this continent, among these people, that was enough to start. The end.